Sorry, I don't love you. Afraid I've grown accustomed to. Cause with you, something isn't wrong, something isn't wrong, something isn't right. I wish you could be happy.
Hey everyone, welcome to Geekdom is back, as is MJ Rawls. We are talking all about Avengers Infinity War today, so here is your spoiler warning. If you have not seen it yet, pause this right now, go see it, and then resume this. But MJ, how are you doing today?
Pretty good. I'm pretty good. How are you?
I am doing well. You know, I think you and I have some similar feelings on this movie. I've been seeing a lot of people praising it and really enjoying it, but you and I have a few problems with it. So I think what we should start with here is we should just start with the massive amount of characters that we see in this movie. Do you feel like they at least balance the screen time fairly well?
So when my friend and I, so it's three of us. Like, we've basically seen every single MCU movie together. So, like, this is kind of like the culmination of 18 movies. And when we got out of the movie theater, we couldn't really talk about what we saw because there was so much that happened.
Right.
Like, we were like, hey, so, like, what do you think of the movie? Like, what's the rating? We were like, I don't know, dude. We're gonna have to sleep on it.
I still haven't rated it.
Yeah, like, because if everybody got screen time, I realize this is a 2.5 hour movie. If you wanted to get everybody screen time, it would be like 4 hours. I think, kind of going over it, maybe the people who are essential to the story got screen time, but there were like some characters there that I wish got more of the story. Specifically Captain America. I thought that he was there for a couple minutes and then he was gone, and then like he would show up and like, oh, he's here, cool, and then he was gone again. You know what I mean? So like,
Yeah.
there were some more than others. I get that the Russo brothers had an insurmountable challenge on their hands, but I don't know. Like, I this movie brings out like a lot of feelings, like, and it's kind of like you go back to it and you're like, wow, all right, what did I just watch? All right, like, who showed up and stuff like that. Yeah, so like, I think for the most part, but there were like parts where I'm like, ah, man, I kind of wish I would have heard more from this character.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean by saying that Cap would just kind of show up here and there. It really did feel like him and Black Widow and everyone he brought back with him, they were more just there to fight, and there wasn't really a whole lot of plot going on with their storyline. Whereas with Guardians and them teaming up with Thor, we got a lot more plot in that. Same with Doctor Strange and Iron Man and Spider-Man, and even the Hulk for a brief period there. More so just Bruce Banner, because that's something else we are probably going to talk about in a bit here. But I think having groups of characters in different places helped a little bit with getting more of a balance between the different plot lines that they were following, because in the end everything did lead back to Thanos being on Earth. So they sort of just gave you bits and pieces and sort of put it all together for you at the end.
Yeah, I mean, like, in an instance, we got a whole like Thor, Rocket, and Groot side quest.
Right.
Like it was like a bigger part of the movie than I initially thought it was going to be. And there were some like plot lines there. Maybe they'll touch on it on Avengers 4. But there was like the Bruce Banner Black Widow scene where they seen each other. It's been years since they've seen each other, and like there was like kind of like the love storyline that they were going. There was like, hey, and then they were like, hey, and then that was it. And then like there was like the Tony Captain America thing where he was gonna call him and he didn't. And I just kind of wanted to, like, Captain America shows up like in all his valor and stuff like that, but I kind of wanted to a little bit more about that, because eventually these guys are going to have to come together. Eventually these guys are going to have to kind of cross the bridges that they've burnt for each other. And I kind of wanted a little bit more leading up to that, but I understand, like, you got to fit so much in 2.5 hours. So like, maybe we'll get more. But yeah, that's just kind of the things that were running through my mind as I was like watching the movie.
Yeah, plus we knew characters were definitely going to die in this film. So why don't we go ahead and talk about the deaths that are actually permanent in this? Because the way this movie went, you definitely have characters who are not coming back, but then you have these characters where we know they're kind of the future of the MCU, so they can't completely be gone just yet. And right off the bat, when the movie starts, it's almost like we're getting a Thor Ragnarok sequel for a brief period of time because it pretty much picks up right where that film left off, I think.
Oh yeah. So you had Thor there. He got beat up, and then you had Loki appear and give Thanos the Tesseract, and then he got that Infinity Stone and whatnot. And then Loki, in an act of selflessness, tries to go after Thanos. I don't understand why he would try to go after him with a knife.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm like, okay, he has two Infinity Stones already, so he kills him. He beats the hell out of Hulk. Uh,
Right.
that was kind of, I was like, wow, all right. Now it showed how like imposing Thanos is. Like he beats Hulk so bad that for the duration of the movie, Hulk doesn't even want to come out anymore.
Right.
Bruce has like this whole like, hey, come on, like help me out. The Hulk's like, nah, I'm good. Like I'm not even gonna. And then so Loki dies, and then Hemrick dies too, and Thor just Thor just
You mean Heimdall?
is like, yeah, Heimdall. My
Yeah.
bad. I always forget how to pronounce his name.
So many weird names in the Thor movies. I totally understand that it is hard to keep track.
And then they throw Hulk, and he gets thrown to Earth and whatnot. The beginning of the movie really like was the best part for me as far as Thanos, and like really like setting the tone as in like, okay, like this is Marvel has been criticized for like not having imposing villains, and he kills two people right off the bat, and you're like, all right, he's another animal, and plus he has the Black Order with him, and Ebony Maw, which is another kind of like highlight for me in the movie, is there, and he's like, let him have his fun, and which was funny, but like. I'm like, all right, man. Like, I'm sitting here. I'm like, okay, Thanos means business.
Yeah, exactly. And I totally agree with you that that opening scene really did set the tone for his character because then later on, killing Loki and Heimdall for him, that was nothing.
Yeah,
And later on, we see him with Gamora and they're going to go retrieve the Soul Stone. And he has to trade a soul in order to get it. And since she is the only one with him, that's a pretty obvious conclusion there. And he just throws her off the top of the mountain, basically, and she falls to her death. And, I think this one upset me more because I was banking on it being Nebula that he killed off, just because he sort of treated her a lot worse than Gamora at times because she's basically just a robot because of him.
oh yeah, he loved Gamora though, and I think the basis of his backstory of the movie was, going to Gamora's planet, basically killing everyone, but like telling Gamora not to look, like giving her like the knife to kind of balance, and training her to be like one of the best warriors in the galaxy. Gamora to me was the biggest emotional piece in the story. She brought brevity, and she brought like this heaviness to Thanos' story. Like I'll give credit to Josh Brolin, although it's like Thanos is CGI. He gave like an emotional aspect to Thanos, and when they're at the mountaintop, and all of a sudden like a Red Skull comes back, which was I was like, oh wow, that's where he's been for all this time, like just kind of hanging out there. And then he says she's like, where like you're crying, like where's it, like why are the tears? And he's like, those tears aren't for him. And I'm like, oh no, he's gonna do it, isn't he? And yeah, and then Gamora dies, and I felt like I don't know, like this scene like was kind of like the end. I had a little bit of problems with, and I'm sure that we'll like talk about it. But
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about it later. But like, this was kind of like this was kind of the hardest scene for like, and I don't know, like in your theater that were people. There was like two people that gasped next to us, like, like I'm like, oh man, like it hit hard. Like there was like there were two kids, and then there were like two girls who were watching it, and the girls were like, oh my god, like, and I'm like, wow. So Thanos, his plot line, he's basically going to do this by any means, and that means killing basically his daughter. Like he's going to sacrifice everything for this like conquest of, I guess, balancing the universe. And I'm like, wow, all right, cool. The stakes are upped.
I think this death was the one that is going to impact the MCU the most going forward because, yes, Loki was in Avengers and the Thor movies, and he's kind of gone from being a thorn in Thor's side to actually being a decent person. But with Gamora, I feel like that just changes the whole dynamic for the Guardians movies going forward. And we do have Guardians 3 coming up. So we know at least a good majority of the team is going to be back for that. But, then in the third act, I believe the only permanent death we have there is Vision because Thanos rips the Mind Stone, right out of his head. And like you said, we will discuss the ending in a bit because I definitely want to go into some details on that and then like what we could see in Avengers 4 and everything like that. But with Vision, you see him just turn from his, red and green color to sort of this gray, stony color as soon as the Mind Stone is taken out of his head.
Vision and Scarlet Witch's arc in the movie. I mean, they gave it a little bit of time and whatnot. Like there was like this like forbidden love, like because he has the Mind Stone, and they kind of know that like they can't permanently be together because like Vision has this thing, and eventually somebody's going to be coming for it. So what my problem is that like you see in the comics and whatnot, Scarlet Witch is really really powerful. Vision even hints at this. Like her power is basically like an Infinity Stone. There was a scene in the Wakanda scene where she's up like watching Shuri like help Vision out, and then she comes down and fights, and then like the heroes look at each other like, why didn't she just come down sooner? Like, uh, I don't know, like Vision to me, there's this whole problem with Tony that I have. And I think like it kind of goes back into Vision. Tony to me a big is a big reason why we're here. Tony has made decisions throughout the MCU, including Vision, that has gotten all the heroes into trouble. And it usually deals with his anxiety. It comes to a head in the movie, but like Vision is basically the one of the embodiments of Tony's mistakes, Tony's failures. Tony's mistake was Ultron. So they had to, you know, make Vision, and Vision came and whatnot and had the Infinity Stone. Well, Vision gets taken to Wakanda and whatnot, that brings Thanos to Earth. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't understand. Like, when I was looking at the movie, I'm like, I don't really understand why anybody's really listening to Tony anymore. He like retired 3 times. Uh, and every decision that he's led up to this point is basically covering a mistake, which makes things worse. So like, I felt for Vision. And I'm like, dude, like your fate has basically been sealed from the minute you were made in Ultron. We didn't really get to see Vision's power and whatnot. And like, I don't know. Like, I feel like when I talk about a lot about this movie, like that aspect, like everybody kind of forgets that aspect. I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And as far as the permanent deaths go, I don't think there's really any way for them to bring back those characters and be able to give a good explanation for that. And while losing Gamora definitely hurts the MCU the most and fans probably too, it's just one of those things where we knew it was going to have to happen. But why don't we go ahead and talk about that ending scene there, and we'll kind of backtrack after this. But because we're talking about these deaths and Vision, it kind of leads right into that. And, you know, once he gets the Mind Stone from Vision, he has all of the Infinity Stones. So all he has to do is snap his fingers, and half of the population is gone. And even though Thor has this giant new axe, which we'll talk a little bit about that later too, because that's kind of the whole reason for Thor's side journey and everything in the movie. But he throws the axe and it goes right into Thanos, and even Thanos is like, you should have aimed for my head, basically. And he's able to snap his fingers still. So we see all of these characters just going to ashes, basically. And my problem with this, and someone pointed this out to me too, it's like they left all of the original Avengers that we sort of started out with. So you lose Falcon, you lose Spider-Man, you lose Doctor Strange, I believe, and you're losing all of these characters. And some of them, we even lose Black Panther too, which it's like, okay, that movie just made them all the money before this one. So we know that they're not going to let characters like Black Panther and Spider-Man stay dead. And I think that was one of my biggest issues with the movie, because it's like they did kill off a few people, but none of them were the characters that I wouldn't say hoping that they would kill off, but it's like you kind of feel like at this point either Tony or Cap or both of them will end up dying, because they've been doing this so long, and we know contracts are up too. So it's one of those things you're like, okay, well, where are they going with this? Because how many people are actually going to believe them that Spider-Man and Black Panther and Doctor Strange and all of these other characters are actually dead?
See, that's the problem with them announcing that there was going to be a Spider-Man 2, like there was going to be a Spider-Man sequel, and that they were looking at making a Black Panther sequel as well.
Right.
And then they've made like, all right, well, James Gunn like talked about, all right, well, I'm working on Guardians 3. So when these deaths happened, there was an initial shock for me, but I'm like, all right, well, they're coming back anyway. There's no way you're going to kill Tom Holland off. He's contracted for how many Spider-Man movies?
Yeah.
And then like Black Panther, I'm like, okay, Black Panther's definitely not staying dead.
And they introduced those two characters in Civil War. So we know for a fact that you don't wait until Civil War to introduce these characters just to kill them off a few movies later each.
Exactly. I mean, this, especially with this Spider-Man, it is like the reformation of like Spider-Man movies. And like what you mentioned, Black Panther made them a ton of money, so he's not going to die. So it did take a little bit of the sting off, because when I went into the movie, I'm like, all right, we've been through 10 years of this, 18 movies. Thanos is supposed to be the big bad. He's supposed to bring a reckoning. That means that one of the big guys are going to have to die. We're going to have to lose one of them. Like, in order for me to feel like that emotional weight. And when that happened, I'm like, oh, all right, well, we got, Avengers OG. And I know there's a theory going around where, like, once time course corrects itself, maybe we'll get everybody back. And then Tony, Cap, and Thor will die, because they were there when, I guess, he snapped his fingers, and then like time has to correct itself, and they're sacrificing themselves. But it took a little bit of the sting away from me. Like, I was just like, all right, well, they kind of went the easy route and took the characters away that we knew were coming back. So, and also it ended on a cliffhanger. There are like numerous interviews where the Russo brothers said, okay, well, we're changing the title. It's not going to be part one and part two. These are going to be two separate movies, and we don't intend on ending on a cliffhanger, which exactly what the movie did. It's like, all right, well, come back for part two next year. All right, well, if it's supposed to be two different stories or two separate stories, I don't know if I still thought the movie was good overall. Like, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But I don't know if did you feel cheated at some point? I'm like, all right, well, I'm not, like we're obviously going to get these characters back, and like it's ending on a cliffhanger. So basically, Avengers 4 is essentially part two.
Yeah, I think I was fairly disappointed with the ending when I was walking out of the theater. And then, I've saved all of these reviews in Instapaper that I have yet to read, but it seems like a lot of people have really enjoyed this. And I do think the movie was really strong pretty much up until the moment that Thanos snapped his fingers. So it's one of those things for me where I know that they're going to undo a lot of what they did, but as far as the temporary deaths go, seeing Peter just like run towards Tony and give him a hug and then start disappearing and say, I'm sorry. I feel like that was emotional more from Tony's aspect, though, because that is something that is going to really get to Tony because he was trying to protect Peter that entire time. And I think that was probably one of the more powerful moments with these temporary deaths, I guess you can call them, because there's no way there's going to be a Spider-Man sequel and they're going to leave Tom Holland dead after this movie.
No, I agree with you on that. If you like everybody, Spider-Man: Homecoming was basically like a mentor movie. It was basically like this young kid in high school who has his powers, and then Tony Stark, who was kind of reckless in Iron Man, and then learning, all right, well, I have to do things for a purpose. Basically, teaching that to Peter, basically like saying like there's a time and a place, and then there's a responsibility with your powers. So yeah, he's kind of like his surrogate son, and with you know them failing on Titan and him disappearing in front of his eyes, it was like coming to a head for Tony. Like Tony has, I think he says as he's fighting Thanos, like I've been waiting for this for 6 years or something like that. You've been in my head for 6 years. So like the source of his anxiety, and like he has the dream in Avengers Ultron. Um, Iron Man 3, he has anxiety over it, and it hurts him and Pepper's relationship there for a little bit. Like the one guy that would end all that anxiety and all that stuff, he lets slip through his fingers, and now he loses his like, his son basically, and now like you're not really sure if Tony is going to completely break down or like give up or like this be the thing that drives him. And I think that Doctor Strange, while they're on Titan, where he's going through all the scenarios and he goes through that one scenario, I think that's what he saw.
Yeah, and speaking of Tony, I want to quickly break down some of these plot lines that we have here. So we have Tony, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and some of the Guardians on Titan. And at first, when the main three first see some of the Guardians, they are fighting each other because they don't know who is who and they've never met before. So I thought, that was a good way to add a little comedy into these very serious situations on the various planets that everyone is on. And we get this big moment where Thanos shows up and, Doctor Strange has the time stone. So he is trying to keep that safe, and he gives Thanos a fake stone, I believe. And then later on, he finally gets hold of the real one because, he's about to kill Tony. And even though Doctor Strange said earlier in the movie that if it comes between you, the kid, and the stone, I'm going to pick the stone every time, and he doesn't do that. So I'm guessing this is all part of his plan, because then he makes a comment after about them sort of having a way to end things. So that one line from Doctor Strange made me think that he kind of knew what he was doing. And that's why I think at the end there, too, the deaths, it was like, okay, well, we'll be seeing some of these characters again anyway, because, Doctor Strange seemed to have this all planned out, because he was able to look into the future and see, what was it, like 14 million different outcomes, and there was only one situation where they win.
Yeah. I thought of, what, that's interesting. I thought about that too. And I'm like, all right, well, he saw the scenario. So he gave Thanos the time stone where Tony was actually, yeah, like you said, Tony was actually about to die. He gets stabbed. And I'm like, all right, well, there's got to be something more to this. Like, is there a curse on the time stone? Is like, is the time stone going to backfire when Thanos uses it? Like, what? And that's the big question going into 4. Like, what did Doctor Strange see? Like, what
Yeah.
what is his motivation here? Like, you don't willingly just. I wouldn't picture, especially with how frosty him and Tony's relationship is. You don't really kind of willingly give up the time stone. Like, there's got to be like a motivation behind it. Maybe it's the kick in the ass that Tony needs to like finally get him and Cap and everybody else on the same page to go fight Thanos or whatnot. I don't know, but like that was interesting to me.
Yeah, so I think, we'll have a little bit more speculation on Avengers 4 when we get to the end of this here, but I do want to talk about, like I said, that little side mission for Thor, because Thor's axe plays a huge role in the third act of the film. So you have him traveling to this place that, Rocket got really excited about because he thought it was only a myth, pretty much. And this is where there's a dwarf star, I believe, and it is used to make some of the biggest and best weapons in the universe, basically. And you have Peter Dinklage as Eitri, I want to say. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, because I don't recall how Thor pronounced it in the movie, if he even did, but he's this giant person. He's like 10 times the size of Thor. And that alone just sort of added some comedy to this moment, even though, like I said, a lot of these moments are very serious because of the threat that Thanos poses. But you have Thor without his hammer. So he needs to wield some weapon so that he can basically be the god of thunder again. So he gets this axe that they call the Stormbreaker. And that's the one we see him throw into Thanos at the end of the movie. What did you think of this scene? Do you think this sort of fit in with everything they were trying to do? Because I really feel like since we started the movie with Thor, this really did just feel like an even bigger continuation of that moment too, because, Thor watches him kill Heimdall and Loki right in front of him. So he has probably the biggest vendetta against Thanos right now, aside from Gamora and Nebula.
I think there were like 2 trains of thought that I had, and I kind of like went back for this over and over again in my mind. There were okay. So when I initially got out the movie, I was like, okay, I kind of wanted a little bit more anger out of Thor because he kills those, and like, dude, you killed his brother and his best friend. Like, why would you know what I mean? Like, why would you be joking? Blah blah blah. Like, but then I was like, oh, this is basically Thor from Ragnarok. And I like Thor from Ragnarok because he has a little bit more of a personality. Chris Hemsworth actually gets to add a little bit more to the character. And it would be weird, I guess, to pair Thor up with the Guardians and then there not to be humor, because when they introduce the Guardians, they have the soundtrack. um, they're basically like the humor of the movie.
Right.
Other than like a few parts and stuff like that. Basically with the Star Lord and his arc. We'll talk about him in a little bit. I hate him, but did I think that the Stormbreaker scene ran a little bit too long? A little bit, because like I'm like, all right, we're on this journey to like for him to get the Stormbreaker. Did we really need like a whole like big time devotion to this? Like you know what I mean? There were some parts were funny where he kept on calling Rocket like a rabbit.
Right. Yeah.
Like, most honorable rabbit. Like that's hilarious. But I don't know, and then Thor comes down, like they come down to Wakanda and join the fight, and he just basically kind of obliterates most of, I guess, like the I don't even know what do you even call them that what they brought down, like those like eight-legged reptilian things.
Yeah, I
But
don't know. I think someone called them like dog aliens or something like
yeah,
that. Like they didn't even know what to call them themselves.
yeah, but like so like two things, like maybe I wanted a little bit more anger out of him, and then you do kind of get that like towards the end, but I it did really drive home that Thor really like has come into his own, because Thor 1 and 2, like it was looked upon as like Thor in the MCU was kind of like the weakest. You know what I mean? Like other than the Avengers movies, like he was kind of like the weakest. Thor is actually, I think, is going to be, like you said, like going to be a big part going forward, especially because he has the weapon that can kill Thanos. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, like I enjoyed Thor. He was like one of the characters that I enjoyed the most. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And that final third act mostly happens on Wakanda. So I think that's something that we definitely need to talk about with how big of a movie that Black Panther was. And, I had been watching stuff and read plenty of interviews and stuff before this, and Chadwick Boseman was basically saying to people that it's not Black Panther 1.5. This is all its own thing. And I definitely see where he's coming from, because this didn't feel like a Black Panther movie. It just happened to be that Wakanda was where the fight ended. And you have Shuri trying to take the Mind Stone out of Vision and save Vision, but he ends up getting out of there, and she was unable to finish because members of the Black Order, get up to the tower and everything, and then Wanda isn't there, and it's just this sort of big ordeal that ends up leading to Vision's death. But I still think that it was important for them to have Wakanda sort of be one of the settings for this movie, even if, we didn't really get too terribly much screen time with Black Panther himself. I think just going there and being like, okay, Shuri is the person for this job, she can do this. And you have Captain America being like, oh yeah, I know where you can go to get this done, sort of thing. So it's like, it's becoming more common knowledge that Wakanda has all of this tech and everything, because they've opened up Wakanda to the rest of the world. And you do get that funny moment where Okoye is like, I was thinking maybe a Starbucks or something like that. So you do still get some of that comedy in the third act too.
Did you have a problem with like Wakanda kind of just being like a set piece that just gets destroyed at the end?
I think it had to be somewhere that was going to be destroyed, and I don't think they could have destroyed New York for the umpteenth time.
True.
So I think that is just a consequence of them having to go to Wakanda to try and get the Mind Stone out of Vision, because there really isn't any other place where they could have done that. And you aren't going to, force Shuri to take all of her equipment somewhere else so she can work. And, I do see where that could come across that way, because it's like, okay, Black Panther just had this big hit with the movie and everything like that, and now we're just going to go destroy Wakanda pretty much. But I think for the most part, a lot of the damage was done more on the outskirts of the city, just because that's where the shield came down and that's where they let all of the creatures in and everything like that. So I think if there's going to be any country that can rebuild quickly, it's definitely going to be Wakanda, because we didn't really see too much action happening in the city portion, except for when they go up to the tower where Shuri and Vision are.
True. I think the Russo brothers like school of thought, like bringing Wakanda in and kind of like Black Panther is like, all right, Black Panther just had a movie in February, and while we kind of want Black Panther, he's definitely going to be a big part going forward in the MCU, most definitely.
Right.
I think that they kind of wanted to highlight other characters first, which was kind of like it was kind of more puzzling me when he like just kind of like was one of the characters that kind of withers away. I'm like, oh
Right.
wow, okay, so like Black Panther's going. So like, are we like elevating like Shuri to Black Panther status? Right? Because she does in the comic. She is
Yeah.
like spoiler. She does obtain like Black Panther powers in the comic. So at first I was like, oh, I'm like Wakanda's like the big set piece, like how convenient. But at the same time, I was kind of like thinking about what you were saying, like with all their technology, Wakanda would be able to rebuild all that in like no time. You know what I mean? Like it's the richest country.
Yeah.
But then I was like, is this like another failure of T'Challa as a king? Because he brings all them there and they destroy stuff and they lose so many people, blah blah blah. I'm like, I don't know about that. Like, I think that he was just trying to help, but
Yeah, I don't see that happening, because Thanos was a threat to everyone. And, if Wakanda opens their doors, so to speak, to the world and he doesn't help, it's like, how is that going to make him look in comparison to all of these other heroes who, buckled down and were prepared to give everything they had to this fight?
yeah, like I said, like you said, like I don't think that destroying New York again. Like, why? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we've already kind of went through that in the Avengers. Like, it like half of New York was destroyed,
And they still
basically.
did it a little at the beginning when Thanos first arrives anyway.
Yeah, Ebony Maw and came there and was like throwing like concrete at everybody and whatnot.
Yeah.
So they still did that, and then they took it offsite. But yeah, like I don't know, like in Wakanda now, like it's like Shuri and Okoye are gonna have to be, like the heads now because T'Challa's gone for the time being. So how is Wakanda going to basically like go on without its king for a while? And like the Earth is in devastation because half the planet is gone. So like it's going to be interesting to see like how Wakanda recovers and what they're going to do because the remaining Avengers are going to need all the help they can get.
Yeah, and they gave Okoye another great line when Scarlet Witch finally comes down from the tower, when those giant things are just rolling everywhere. And she's like, why was she up there this whole time? And,
Yeah,
that was just one of
I
those
said the
moments where
same
you're like,
thing.
yeah, that's very logical. Why was she up there?
Like, you could have came down earlier. Like what's going on? Like
Yeah, she could have been on the ground fighting to start, and then once Shuri was done with the Mind Stone, just go back up there, because clearly she can kind of sort of fly with her powers now. Or she's always been able to do that, but I can't explain any science behind it. So,
I got a question for you. So what do you think about Star Lord? And because I have strong feelings on Star Lord, I think he's a jerk. He's he's an emotional jerk that messed everything up.
yeah, I totally felt that way when he started basically just screaming at Thanos while Mantis had him sort of under this kind of trance so that they could try and get the gauntlet off of him. And they almost did too. And then he just goes and ruin that. And when you have Tony Stark telling you to be calm, you should probably take that as a hint to be calm. But then again, Peter Quill doesn't know any of these people really, because they've sort of existed in this other universe, basically. I mean, not literally, but figuratively, they've been on all of these other planets. They've never come across Thor. They've never come across the Avengers. They were sort of in their own little world for their first two movies, and now they have to figure out how to interact with all of these heroes they've never even seen before. So I get him not really knowing when to listen to someone else, but I think in that very moment it was a really stupid idea.
Yeah, I was like, dude, what are you doing? Like they like Peter and Tony are like, we almost have the glove off. Just just a couple more minutes, calm down. And he just hits him, and then like Thanos is like, what? And then another thing too, Thanos had 4 stones at this point.
Right.
He really got subdued by like Mantis, Spider-Man, and Iron Man with 4 stones. I was like, okay, all right. I understand. Like, we have to like show like a little bit, but like Thanos could have just went like with the Mind Stone or the Power Stone or the Reality Stone, and just like, all right, well, I'm done with you guys, but I get it.
Well, I think because he didn't have the Mind Stone just yet, he probably like couldn't get into Mantis's head enough to keep her from getting into his head, is my guess.
True, true, but I was just like, all right, well, like he had the Power Stone, like he had the
Yeah,
Reality Stone.
he had enough.
Yeah, he had enough to not let webbing from Spider-Man like, oh God, I can't see, and then Tony goes toe to toe with him, which I admire. He gets a planet thrown at him. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like, and then nanotech basically um has Tony survive as long as he could, but Star Lord was kind of like the unlikable character in the movie. Like, it starts off when like Gamora's talking about Thor's muscles. He starts to get a little bit like jealous, like, hey, blah blah blah, what's going on here? Um, and then when they go see the Collector, uh, his apprehension to I guess shoot Gamora first, but Thanos changes that anyway. He
Right. He makes it
changes his
into a
bullets to
bubble gun.
bubbles. So like, but yeah, like that really made me mad. I'm like, dude, like the fate of the world is at stake. I understand. Listen, you love Gamora, but she told you at the beginning of the movie, like, hey, like, listen, there's something that has to happen, like, in order for Thanos not to complete this damn gauntlet. I'm gonna need you to like really understand this, and he didn't. And like, I'm like, all right, well, thanks, Peter Quill, thanks.
Yeah, exactly. Well, why don't we go ahead and get into some final thoughts here, because I know there are a few things we haven't talked about too much here, and Black Widow is one of them. You know, she doesn't have a super huge role in this movie, but when she arrives at the Avengers compound with Cap and Falcon and them, she sees Bruce, and they have that little awkward moment, and Falcon happily points out that it's awkward for everyone. So you have that moment, and then you have her fighting in Wakanda, basically. So she doesn't get, like Cap, she doesn't get a huge amount of screen time. And if they are going to do that Black Widow solo film, I think that's okay for her to not be a huge part of this movie, because I think they will have more of her in Avengers 4 too, just because you know they kind of just left us with the original crew there.
Yeah, that was kind of weird to me because I'm like, dude, like Cap, Falcon, uh, Black Widow, like they've been gone for a while. We've had movies since then with other characters, and like they've been on the run. Like you saw like them, you know, going to the Avengers compound and like talking to General Ross and says, like arrest them. So like they're still on the run.
Right.
I would have think I wanted to kind of know a little bit more about like they hint at it like hey, where have you been, like we haven't been like staying at like like 5 stars hotels and stuff like that, but like I kind of wanted to know a little bit more about them, like where they've been, what they've been up to, what they've been fighting, because they've obviously like they appeared where like Scarlet Witch and Vision are, so they're obviously in contact with them. So
Right.
like, what have they been doing all this time? Like, where have they been at? Like, that's kind of what I wanted to know a little bit more about the movie. Like, we've been with Thor, we've been with Guardians a little bit more. Like, let's hear about like them and where they were going.
Yeah, and they also very briefly explain that Hawkeye and Ant-Man are on other assignments because of their families, and being on the Avengers was too hard on them, and being sort of these larger than life heroes. But I do think both of them are set to be in Avengers 4, so we'll probably get more on that in the next movie. But I think overall, up until the end, this was a solid movie. Like I said, I still haven't rated it yet. I think I need to sit with it a little more and sort of, obviously this podcast has helped sort out a lot of thoughts on this. And I'm glad, you and I are pretty much on the same page with this. But it's one of those things where, like you said, so much happened. It's like, I might need a week before, I rate this. So by the time everyone is listening to this, maybe I will have rated it. We won't know until that happens. But is there anything else that we didn't bring up just yet before we go into the Avengers 4 speculation some more here?
No, like I agree with you. Like even right now, like I'm supposed to write about it, and I think I need to go see it again because I need to kind of process and just like, whoa, what just happened? There were so many characters and stuff like that that like you're like, all right, little plot line here, blah 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 here, stuff like that. Like it was it was over 20 characters, I think.
Yeah.
So like I'm just like I don't even know what to rate it either. Like I'm just like what in like even like okay, so I saw this Thursday night. Friday night, and even like while I'm in a group chat with friends, we're like raising, what I mean? Like I don't know, dude. Like I need the weekend to kind of sit with this and like figure out what the hell just happened. Like I don't know. It's one of those movies that like it you kind of just need to kind of parse through. It's so like I know a lot of people have said like this is like the best MCU movie ever, and everybody, like everybody's gonna have a different opinion about it. And it's interesting because like I've seen different opinions about it, both good and bad, and I don't know, like it's one of those movies that like for me, and you've spoken about this too, like it's just not like a quick fix, like all right, this is my conclusion, this is what I think about it. Like it's a movie, it's a really like it's a thinking movie because there's so many moving parts.
Yeah, exactly. Well, because this ties into the next movie, we'll talk about this here now, but for the post-credit scene, we get Nick Fury and Maria Hill, and they are also two who turn to ash. And right at the very end, we see the Captain Marvel logo on Fury's little, like, paging device that seems very strange for 2018, but it's probably this really secure encryption. And, I believe that Captain Marvel is set to appear in Avengers 4 too, but we do get her solo film that's set in the 90s. So I'm not entirely sure which movie this post-credit scene is really alluding to because, we saw Thanos a long time ago in a post-credit scene, and it didn't pay off until this movie. So I think, that one can go either way because we're in 2018 though. I think it ties into Avengers 4 a lot more than it ties into the movie that's going back to the 90s. So I feel like between what Doctor Strange said and the fact that we will see Captain Marvel, something is going to happen in Avengers 4 that is going to undo all of these characters who turn to ash and everything like that. So what do you think, their solution might be in Avengers 4? Because I don't really have any ideas, because at the end we see Thanos just sitting there watching the sunset with a smirk on his face, and it's hard to tell what exactly that one outcome was that Doctor Strange predicted. So even though this technically isn't supposed to be a part two, they definitely have to touch on what happened in Infinity War. There's no way they can just be like, oh yeah, we're just moving on without all these people.
Well, my first question is where has Captain Marvel been all this time? Because like the movie that comes out in 2009, like you mentioned, like it's going to be in the 90s, and now I'm wondering like, well, Captain Marvel is super powerful, so they're definitely going to need her. The outcome that I'm kind of thinking of is that I may have said this earlier and whatnot. I'm not sure how they're going to get the time stone back, but they're going to have to go back in time and either stop Thanos from getting the Infinity Gauntlet or going way back in time to stop like this from ever happening. But I think in messing with the timeline that we're going to get everybody back like who disappeared. The deaths pre like pre timeline fix are going to stick. So I think
Right.
Loki and Gamora they're gone. Like that's it.
Yeah, and Vision too, because, he has to take the Mind Stone and that
Yeah,
ends up killing him.
yeah, Vision is kaput. He's gone. But like I think in correcting the timeline, everybody who is currently existing, like Cap, Iron Man, Black Widow, Thor, they're going to be the ones that disappear. I know spoilers, but like there's like there's like pictures of the set going around, and it shows like Captain America pre-beard. So I don't know what they're gonna do, but they obviously have to go back in time. And I think somebody alluded to like Back to the Future too, where they go back and like try to like fix the timeline then. So I think it's gonna have to do with time travel. I think we're gonna get a little bit more into the cosmic realm. I think that's where Marvel is headed. I don't know what's gonna go on with this merger, but hopefully like it leads in more into that. Like I would have loved for like Silver Surfer and maybe Fantastic Four to kind of be and Adam Warlock to be more of a part in this, but I understand why they couldn't. But yeah, it's definitely gonna have to do with time travel because I don't think that the current incarnation of the Avengers are going to beat Thanos. Not with the Infinity Gauntlet. I mean, just ask Hulk about that. He's in hiding within Banner, so
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if Vision actually does end up being a permanent death because it certainly felt that way at the end of the movie because it was before Thanos snapped his fingers. But at the same time, if they get the Mind Stone back and the Time Stone and go back in time, does that mean Vision still has the Mind Stone? There's a lot of pieces that they'll have to put together here to sort of fix everything and bring back these characters that we know have a future in the MCU. And I a year is a long time to wait, but we have Ant-Man and the Wasp coming this summer in June, I believe, June or July, one of those
it's
two.
July. I think July 6th.
Okay, yeah, so we have that coming, and then we'll get Captain Marvel, I believe, like a month and a half or 2 months before Avengers 4. So those two will
Yeah.
be very close together. And I think that's also part of the reason why maybe they're choosing to go back to the 90s for Captain Marvel, because then it's like we'll get familiar with her character and everything she is able to do before seeing her in Avengers 4. But it'll definitely be interesting to see how they have this all play out.
Oh yeah. We have to with Spider-Man being apparently like the start of the next big phase of Marvel movies. It's gonna be interesting to see how like we send characters off. Like
Yeah.
Chris Evans' contract is up, and I think he actually it may be a negotiation tactic, but he said he's done after these movies. I'm not sure what Chris Hemsworth is doing. I know that like his character just kind of just set in stride. Robert Downey Jr. I don't know. I mean, because most of his character, basically, he's just sitting in a chair and kind of like piloting, um, an Iron Man suit, and he could just show up. You know what I mean? Black Widow, that movie's in production, so I don't know if that's going to be a prequel or not. But maybe Scarlett Johansson isn't done yet. But it's going to be interesting to see these characters off and how we introduce the new Avengers and like how they're going to take us into like the next phase of Marvel movies. Now we're going to get 3 a year, so they have a plan.
Yeah, and we'll just have to wait and see if Tony's wedding actually happens or not.
Oh man, this guy, poor Pepper Potts.
Yeah, exactly. Well, MJ, I think we definitely covered a lot here today. So thank you so much for coming on to talk about this.
No problem, no problem. Everybody, I'm sure everybody's good saw it and probably going to go see it again. So
Absolutely. Well, to our listeners, as always, thank you all for listening, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
take care.